Welcome to the Mindfuckery podcast, which has been featured in FeedSpot's top 10 podcasts on emotional abuse. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and in here we explore areas that others fear to tread. We talk about the mindfuck that was your life, and we talk honestly about what happened. And it's these honest conversations that are going to be key to creating the life that you were born to live. I promise you, the only person you will be able to be honest with is yourself. I'm the founder of the Divorce Sanctuary and Wound Talking, and I've been a woundologist for over 20 years, working with past life wounds, clearing ancestral trauma, and working with this life wounding. And it's through my own personal journey that I know how much this hurts and how confusing life becomes. So many questions, no real answers. I'm author of Finding Lily, the A to Z of emotional abuse, and I'm about to publish Divorce Matters, which has been written to support you through the physical divorce process, divorcing emotionally and healing the emotional wounds. And this book gives you permission to ask for the information you've been told not to ask for. So, welcome along for the journey of a lifetime. Hello and welcome to episode 22. Last week I said I want to talk about wound talking, which I do want, but I am going to touch on something that's really exciting that's just happened I'm going to say over the weekend, but actually really yesterday. I got my hard copy of Divorce Matters, and I'm going to go into and follow that whole thing through. So, Divorce Matters is now live. It's been published. It was published on the 2nd of September, but I didn't have a live copy. I didn't have a hard copy to make sure that it was on the page. It was, it was looking okay. So I couldn't do anything. And then I've had loads of other bits and pieces that have been going on over the last 48 hours, trying to update and get it out and get the information out. So I'll put a link into the description box on how to order that, and I'll speak as I go through and talk about wound talking. So I'm going to take you back in time to 2016 when I wrote Finding Lily. My life was falling apart, and it probably had been for a year. I found messages that my now ex-husband had sent someone the year before in 2015, and I then spent a year probably trying to hold everything together and make sense of everything, and there were so many other bits and elements that were going on in our lives. And then I was sat on a beach, and I was on my own in Greece, and out of nowhere came this story, Finding Lily. And in there, as I was writing it, I could see, which I'd already seen, but I could see in black and white, ink on paper, the similarities in the relationships that I had. But I was there for another 5 weeks. I made the most of what I could. I had, you post pictures, you pretend everything's okay, but every single picture that I posted was me on my own. It wasn't us as a couple. We celebrated our wedding anniversary out there. That was just a farce, because discussing beforehand whether we were actually going to be together on a wedding anniversary or whether our marriage was over. And then there was the manipulation going on of I'll let you know when I've made my decision. And I was so frustrated and angry, and I had so many different emotions going on, and I had so many, fuck it, I'm over this. And then it was like, oh my God, how do I survive? How do I live? How do I survive on my own financially? I've given everything up at this point. Anyway, as time moves on, we get home, and within a very short period of time, and I don't even think it was a week, he had left. We were seeing a couples counsellor before we went. She'd said to me, I want to see you on your own. And I can't remember whether I saw her on my own before I went away. I think I did. I might have seen her twice actually. And she could see manipulation. She called it his harem. He had a harem of women. And then I went back, when we got back from Greece, I went and saw her. and had a session with her, and she was encouraging me to leave or to get him to move out. It was so daunting. It's anyone who's been in that situation knows how scary it is, those decisions. Financially alone, what I'd given up, I had no money. I literally had no money, and I had no idea how I was going to survive. I had children, they weren't his, but I had children that I needed to support as well. So that marriage broke down, and I started watching videos. Nothing made sense. I could not make sense. I was in so much pain and my mind was all over the place, and I saw little bits that were saying, go no contact and things like that. So I tried that, but rather than contact me on my phone, he'd contact me through Messenger. Oh, you shouldn't be going through this alone, and I can't remember actually what the other messages were. We should be together, we're soulmates. Oh, I don't know, there's so many different elements to this. But as time goes on, I was learning more. Been working with wounds for, I suppose at that time it would have been about 15 or 18 years, maybe, something like that. And that's what I did. I worked with people's wounds. I'm able to, I suppose, hear them. I don't know, something inside me tells me what's going on inside. I can't hear voices. I don't know what people are thinking, but I do get an emotional feeling with regard to wounds. So as time goes on, we have to go through the divorce process. I rented, and I had to move out. I couldn't afford the rent. I'd given up a business of mine to work for my ex-husband, and I'd then been put in a position where I had to go back to work financially. He said to me, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go and get a job. As you can imagine, my mind was everywhere and I couldn't think, because the brain fog or the confusion, everything that was going on. I'd also, leading up to this point, found other messages. I'd found him on a dating website. I'd found that he'd gone away with work and he wasn't where he said he was. All these weird things that I'd been dealing with. He'd gone off on holiday and then told me at some point that actually he hadn't. He'd come back early and he'd gone to stay with somebody. Every week there was a new thing. So here I am, 2016, then moving into 2017. I have to move out of my home. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. One of my children, who is still living with me, she went and lived with her sister until we found somewhere that we could afford. And it just feels like such a mess and just such a different time. And all this time, and during this time, I decided that I was going to publish Finding Lily. That had been about a relationship that I'd had 20 something years before, and said I could see the similarities that were going on. And as I moved through this and as things started to settle, we then get into the divorce process. And what I realised going through that was how important it was to divorce emotionally. So my shift went from the work that I was doing, which was I was a Reiki master, I was teaching Reiki, I was a soul plan reader, I used to do energetic healing work and things like that. And I moved more into healing of the wounds, healing of these emotional wounds, encouraging people and helping people divorce emotionally. And what that means is that you get no reaction. You get no reaction when you get an email or you get correspondence, or you have to pick the phone up to them, or they're trying to play with your emotions and manipulate you. There's nothing. You don't have a feeling, and that is the ultimate goal. You've gone through that whole process and you've healed those wounds. So the original wound is where the trauma started. That is usually in childhood. You will have experienced something that is a trigger for these relationships. It's a trigger for your response. It's an emotion that comes up, and that original wound stems from somewhere. It stems from either somebody doing something to you or saying something to you, behaving in a certain way. My biggest thing that I've learned, become to realise, probably since 2018, let's say 2018, is that most of us just want to be seen and heard as a person, individual, a child, whatever it was. We just needed to be seen and heard by someone. That was my biggest revelation. And when I was working with the original wounds, most of my work comes from working with the original wound. It might be a situation that you've been in. It might be one or both parents were dismissive or weren't there. They might have been there physically, but they weren't there emotionally. They might have been abusive, mentally, physically abusive, even sexually abusive. There were so many different people that I worked with on so many different levels. And that's where the original wound comes from. And most of my work is with that. And it has been. It started in 2002 when I took a past life energetics course. And the work that we did with that was talking to the wounds that have come in from past lives. And then, I've spoken about this before, around about 2013 I started working with ancestral wounding. I wasn't actually talking to the wounds at that point, but I was tracking them back through that ancestral lines and going back, I mean, thousands of years, so many generations back. It was so fascinating. And clearing the trauma, clearing it back and then clearing it forward, so it wasn't going forward into our lives, our children's lives, our children's lives, forward. So when I got to 2018, it was as if I was starting to come full circle, and I was using these techniques that I learnt with both of the past life energetics and the ancestral clearing. I was starting to pull this all together, and this is how the original wound work started. It's tracking back and removing the original wounds using these really powerful techniques to clear the trauma within the body, going back through that timeline until the very first point that was experienced. And we're healing, we're taking out and healing the trauma, literally removing it. Much like a physical wound, if you got hurt in some way and you've got a bruise, that bruise could be still sitting right the way deep into the bone. You could cause damage to a muscle or a ligament. You could break a bone. There's so many different levels of trauma that happen physically within the body. This also happens emotionally. And when you get wounded emotionally, exactly the same happens. The trauma lands in the body somewhere. It might be a weak area. It might be an area that represents what the trauma represents to you. So that's how the original wound work started. And as I was going through the divorce process, I realised how important, as I said, it was to divorce emotionally. Because once you've divorced emotionally, it gives you a power. It gives you this power to turn around and say, oh, actually, that doesn't work for me. Actually, I don't know what you're telling me is the truth. Actually, can you provide this information? And it sort of stems to the book that I've just published, Divorce Matters, because that was really where that seed was planted, the fact that we need to divorce emotionally. Divorce Matters it covers all sorts of areas of divorce, and it's supporting. It also gives you permission in this one book. It gives you permission to ask the questions that you've been told not to ask. I found that really important because I was being told that the solicitors were only in it for the money. I actually can't remember what the claims were now. I have probably got them written down somewhere because I'm sure I've referenced them in some of my YouTube videos. I was like, oh, they're only after you for your money. They're not looking out for you. All of those sort of things, which if you've gone through or are going through, I'm sure you've heard. Let's keep this. Let's try and do this between us so we can keep the costs down. No, so they can keep the costs down, so it doesn't cost them financially in the long run. So this is what the workbook and the book is about. It's about healing on every level and giving you permission to ask the information. So as I was going through the divorce, I'd agreed, stupidly now, but I had agreed to let him pay for the divorce on condition I would agree to the reasons he was divorcing me. And I remember speaking to a friend at the time, and she said, what are they? What are those conditions? She said, I bet you everything that is in there is stuff that he's done to you. And more or less it was. And there were things that you can't really divorce people for, but it was worded in a way that he got it through. Anyway, I just thought, you know what, he's paying for it. Let's just get this over and done with. But as I started to heal, I started to really regret doing that, because he was trying to insinuate that it was my children that had caused the breakdown of the relationship, not his affairs. And it was various other things that had caused the relationship to break down. There was some really ridiculous things. There were some really funny things now looking back. And you just think, I did wonder how that got through. I wonder how his solicitor reacted to wording it, unless it was a game to them as well. That's the other thing. That's the only thing I can think of as a bit of a game. And it's all about winning, isn't it? This is it. So fast forward a little tiny bit. We were going through this divorce process. I was experiencing horrific rumination. I was thinking like maybe I'd done the wrong thing. I got it all wrong. And then I spoke about this last week. I was running a workshop. I think it was like a 14-day or 7-day meditation. And what I realised was I wasn't staying in rumination when I was grounded. So I've been recording these videos. I've been grounding, and I've realised, oh my gosh, that's really weird. I did get upset by some of the letters, but not to the extent that they'd been wiping me out. So I started to look at the wounding and healing the wound and divorcing emotionally. And this is how it all came about, divorcing emotionally. And that's what we need to do. We need to get that divorce of those emotions, that breaking of the trauma bonds and getting the closure, etc., etc. And then I somehow was doing some box breathing. I can't even remember how that came about. It was something I was doing with, I think, some other meditation or some other work. So I then realised that I was actually could lift myself out of this rumination really, really quickly because I was really in touch with my body. But it still needs you to remove the trauma. You still need to get to these original wounds. And then I thought we were at the point of finalising everything. And then one day I just got knocked for 6. And I didn't really understand what was going on. And I just went and sat on my bed for a moment. And I started talking to myself, and I was talking to my inner child. I've been working with my inner child for a long time, and I started talking to my inner child, and I started healing the 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, and the 8-year-old. And this is where the wound talking sort of comes from. It's a combination of things, how this happened. You can actually talk to your wounds, which is really what I was doing through the past life energetic work. Was I talking to them? I was finding out where they were lodged, what they represent, and what the trauma was physically linked to. So maybe it's an evolvement of that. This is how you can heal yourself. You feel as if you're in pain, or you don't feel as if you are in pain. You are in pain. You feel the pain, and you find it in your body, and then you ask what it is, what it represents, and what it means to you, and then you let it go. In a nutshell, it's finding where it is within your body. And it was through this process and various other things, because I didn't heal at that point. I still had stuff going on. And and I have spoken again about this as well, one of my biggest shifts was I thought I had bipolar, but I was recording some information. I was getting ready to do a live. I was running an event or something like that, and I was making notes, and it suddenly occurred to me, and I think it had occurred to me before that, because I found some information recently that I'd written down in a workbook that says, if everything's a lie, and was my statement. Hang on a minute, I've got this, but it's like peeling back the layers. So at that point I was ready to let go of that bipolar one, and I thought, oh my gosh, if everything I've been told about this relationship is a lie, why am I holding on to the thought process that I've got bipolar? And it all came down to, I was sitting in the lounge. I think I just got in from work. My ex-husband walked in the door. I really didn't want to go and meet him. It was such an awful atmosphere in the house, and he was telling me something, and I don't know whether he was I don't even know what he was saying, but my energy, I just felt like he'd sucked the energy out of me, and I was just about to collapse emotionally inside. And I thought, no, you're not going to do that to me. I'm not going to allow you to do this to me. And so I lifted myself out. I grounded myself in that moment. I remember where I was in the kitchen, and I just thought, no, I'm not going here. I'm not doing this today. And I took a deep breath in, and he turned around to me. He said, see, this is why we think you're bipolar. And my brain went, what? And then I went, we? Who's we? I'd already picked up his words had changed, the way what he was eating had changed, the way he was speaking had changed, what he was wearing had changed. We think you've got bipolar. And I then for 6 years I kept thinking, oh my gosh, it must be because I've got bipolar. And I was able able to squash that. So talking to yourself, really listening and being in your body. Your head was tricked to believe the information that you were told was the truth, but your body was fighting it and saying it isn't. That they were saying, no, it is. Listen, I gave the explanation of gaslighting. I think that was last week, where you're told a lie. A lie is a lie. And then with gaslighting, it's backed up with a piece of evidence or false evidence. Gaslighting is so dangerous. So this is how I started to develop wound talking. This is how I started to show people how to heal. And it doesn't stop there, because during this time I was looking at things that I could do for my YouTube channel, recorded some videos, and it was the A to Z of emotional abuse, or as near as I could get, because I couldn't find something for every letter. And then I thought, oh, what am I going to do with all this information? So I started putting it on Instagram, and somebody reached out and said, oh, I hope this is your next book. It was actually the publishers of Finding Lily. And I thought, oh wow, actually my next book was going to be called That Effing Pink Umbrella. That's a whole nother story. I really must tell that at some time, because that taps into so many emotions and so much pain and a bit of triangulation and insecurity and self-esteem, and oh my gosh, I could list probably the whole book of A to Z. Anyway, so I decided, right, that's a really great idea, and I converted that into a book. And I know it's dips in and out of the top 20 emotional abuse. That was a massive turning point. Unfortunately, 2020 was literally on its heels of publication, so I wasn't really able to do very much with it. And then I was on a course, and that was that must have been 2020, the end of 2020, I think. And during that course I came up with, I'd already started writing a book called 3 Things You Should Never Do Divorcing a Narcissist. I had the cover, I had everything. I got 1 and 2 and a bit of 3 written. And then I did this course, and while I was doing that, I created a free workbook called Turn Broken into Your Superpower, which had some brilliant information in there with regards to negotiation, because I've got a sales background, and manipulation and how things can be manipulated, and not using their techniques, but finding other ways of supporting yourself and getting what you want out of the divorce, holding things for your back pocket, just a list of things that are really important, because as soon as you submit your list that's really important in the divorce, these are the things that I want that tea set, I want that picture, I want X amount of contact with the kids. That father that was never ever involved, didn't want anything to do with his kids or her kids, it could be the other way around, was never there for bath time, bedtime, story time, was never there on a Saturday or a Sunday for football, netball, gymnastics, horse riding. That they will become parent of the year. They will just pull it out the bag. And that tea set that was given to you by your great aunt that's been passed down through generations, that is the tea set they want. And that picture that you want, they're going to fight you for, because they were there when you bought it. Your money, you liked it, they didn't, but they were there when you bought it, so they have a right to it. And it's all of these things. And the last thing you want is to come away, exhausting all your finances, fighting for things that then you look at and think, oh my God, that picture on the wall, it just reminds me of the pain that I went through getting that. And the cost isn't just financial, it is emotional, it can be physical, spiritual and mental. Anything that you say that you want, they will, I'm not saying in every case, but majority of times, is something that they want, because they will fight you at every level. They just need to win, and that's why it's so important. So coming full circle, I actually recorded a video, and that was on divorce, and I'd found a worksheet, and this worksheet was on divorcing, just generally divorcing, and I did this video on this worksheet versus divorcing an emotionally abusive stroke person higher up on the narcissistic spectrum, and I put that out. And then I thought, actually, this is really quite good. I'm going to pull in my 3 things you should never do divorcing a narcissist, and created a workbook around it, a workbook, healing book, because everything in it is there and it's designed to help you with the wounding. It's designed to help you emotionally, and it's broken into 5 sections. So you've got the section with children. It gets you to look at every angle. One of my biggest things that I say in my group for people that are trying to negotiate and sort out visitation of children is to have written into your agreement that you want to have this renegotiated at certain times. And this is purely from my experience, because when my children got to certain ages, their needs changed. When I divorced their dad, they were really young. By the time they got to teenagers, everything had changed. But the attitude was, this is what you wanted, this is what you asked for, this is what you put in place, you wanted in place. So I knew that even with me trying to negotiate on their behalf, because it was better to have it in place that you have got set ages that you go back and renegotiate. So if your children are 1 and, I don't know, say 1 and 4, when they get to 8 and 11, their needs are going to be completely different to 1 and 4-year-old. And yet you could be working on something that you agreed at that time. So have really crucial age steps in there. It could be at 7, it could be every year. And if you've got it written in and you don't need it that year, okay, look, we should be negotiating. Is it working for you? It's working for me. Great, let's leave it as it is. And that's it, done deal. You might not need to do that. It's so important. The other one is to get really important dates out the way. So Christmases, birthdays, family events, those are that are really important to you. What do you do? Because this happened to me a lot. What do you do when Mother's Day falls on the father's weekend? And what do you do when Father's Day falls on your weekend? Christmas, Easter, other holidays, summer holidays. How are you going to split that? If you're divorcing someone who unfortunately is stubborn and vindictive, as some of them can be really nasty, it's really crucial that you get all of this stuff done right at the beginning when somebody is supervising it. So just really look. So this is what Divorce Matters is, but it is more than that. It's got information from the A to Z in there. So I've taken some of the words, and so it's got a bit of that in there. It's got healing techniques. At every section, it asks you how you're feeling about it, how you think your ex will respond, and what do you think they will agree to and won't agree to. And it has in every section the best scenario, next best scenario. So it gets you to think. It's also got in there a bullet point index, so you can keep track of any notes and things that you've written down. I do this all the time. I can never find where I've written something. So it's got an index, so you can say on page 56, the conversation, or there's information, financial information, there's such and such. One of the things that had happened to me during my divorce was I was at a point where I was questioning some of the financials, but we were also at a point where I thought the divorce was being finalised. And in the end, I overlooked some of the stuff that I really wish I hadn't overlooked, because nothing made sense. And I was being told bank accounts had been shut down, and a year or 2 years before, there were all sorts of odd financial things that made no sense. So it's little tiny things like that. That's why I've written Divorce Matters. These are all the odd things that happened to me. These are things that I wish I'd known. If you're told people don't do that, just because people don't do it doesn't mean you can't do it. And the last bit is, the healing guide at the end. It's got so much in there to help you while you're divorcing physically. You can divorce emotionally, writing out your story, talking about money, talking about all sorts of different things. So I've tried to write it in a way that I wish I'd had a copy. I really do. And because of the way it's written, it's like, well, I just doing it because I've been asked I need this information. I've been told I need this information. So it's giving you permission to ask when you've been told not to. Not like you asking for it. It's like somebody else asking for it. But the wound talking is so powerful. And if you'd like to learn how to do that, I am going to be running some courses very soon in October. Email me and I'll get some information over to you, and I can do it. I'm going to run it in a workshop, and we can do some live wound talking, but I can also talk to you and talk you through doing it yourself. These I've spoken about it so many times. It's something that I started studying and working with when I did my spiritual life coaching way back 2010. During our childhood and the first crucial 7 to 8 years, and I've done videos on why I say 7 to 8. It's 7 to 8 years is because my experience was at 7, I don't think we turn on. Some people mature and have been nurtured in a different way emotionally to the way other children have been nurtured. Disassociation also comes into this as well. Up until that age, we live in a theta state. It could be longer depending on the environment that you grew up in, whether it was safe enough. But those crucial young years, up until about 7 or 8 years old, where you're taking on as a sponge everything as a belief. You live in this theta state. We take on words as beliefs. And this is what I will also be teaching in this workshop, is bashing out beliefs on our belief systems, because it's really easy to identify and challenge some of these statements that we were told as young children and realise actually they're not mine. These were given to me. That was somebody's belief or somebody's frustration or anger at the time. And if you grew up around unhealthy or in an unhealthy unit, you will be taking on the beliefs of the people. And even if you're lucky enough to live in a healthy unit, you'll be taking on healthy beliefs. So it works both ways. It's crucial. And if you've got children, start to look at the way you speak to them, because what they are hearing, they take on as the truth, as did you, as did your parents, as did their parents, and it goes back down that ancestral line. And hence how and why ancestral healing is so crucial to be dealing with as well. I hope this week, I know it's slightly different, but I hope it's been really beneficial. If you want to join me on the workshop on wound talking, and if you'd like a copy of my book or any of my books, I will put the link to my book page on my website, and then you can have a look at what's available. As always, I'm sending you loads and loads of love.